My name is Clara Moss, and I was 38 years old on the night my family left me sitting in a hotel lobby on Christmas Eve with my daughter, 2 tote bags full of wrapped presents, and a room key that didn't exist because my name was never on the reservation. The Ashford Grand Hotel in Charlotte, North Carolina stands 14 floors above the corner of Trade and College Street, and from the outside it looks exactly the way you expect a place called the Ashford Grand to look. A revolving door with brass fittings. A doorman in a coat with gold buttons. Christmas garlands strung between stone columns, lit by small white bulbs that don't blink or flash, just burn steady and cold, like they have something to prove. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. We had driven 3 hours and 20 minutes to get there. My daughter Ava slept the last hour with her cheek against the window and her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Nibbles, tucked under her arm. Mr. Nibbles is gray with one ear that flops forward, and she has had him since she was 2 years old. She takes him everywhere that matters to her, and that tells you something about how seriously she was taking this trip. The fireplace in the lobby was the first thing she noticed when we came through the revolving doors. She pointed and said, "Mom, a real fire." Like it was evidence. Like the existence of a real wood-burning fire in a hotel lobby meant Christmas was definitely happening, the good version of it, and nothing in the world could go wrong. That was 5:47 in the afternoon. By 8:22, my brother Dean had stood up from the dinner table in the hotel restaurant, folded his napkin, set it carefully beside his plate, and said the words that ended whatever version of Christmas I had been trying to hold together since October. He said them quietly. Dean says most things quietly. The quietness is always the point. You've been miserable since we got here. The kids can see it. Mom can see it. Do us all a favor and take the night. My mother looked at her plate. Simone, Dean's wife, touched his arm the way she touches his arm when he says something she agrees with, but doesn't want to appear to endorse too openly. The 3 of them stood up and they walked toward the elevator bank, and I sat at that table with half a plate of salmon going cold in front of me, and my daughter looking at me with her 10-year-old eyes trying to figure out if she was allowed to be scared. I didn't cry at the table. I waited until I was sure they were gone. The backstory matters because none of what happened that night makes sense without it. My name before I was Clara Moss was Clara Haley, which is the name I went back to after the divorce was finalized in March of 2021. Daniel Moss and I had been married for 6 years. We had Ava together. We had a joint savings account and a 2-bedroom rental in a part of Concord that was on the edge of becoming nice, and for a while, maybe the first 3 years, we had the real version of a life we had both wanted. Then something shifted in him. Not suddenly. Gradually, the way water erodes stone, you don't notice it happening until the shape of the thing has already changed. He started working later. He started being where he said he was less often than he used to be. He started speaking to me in a register that was technically polite and actually cold, the way a thermostat is polite when it clicks off. 11 days before he told me our marriage was over, he cleaned out the joint savings account. He moved $22,000 into an account in his name only, which he was legally allowed to do because both names were on the account and the money was technically joint property. The timing was not a coincidence. I know that now. I knew it then too. I just needed time to stop making excuses for the shape of it. I started the process of rebuilding my life with $412 in a checking account, a car with a check engine light I couldn't afford to diagnose, and a 6-year-old who needed me to hold it together so she could figure out what falling apart was supposed to look like. I am a bookkeeper. I work for a mid-size residential construction company called Alderman Build Group, which operates out of an office park on Route 73 in Concord, North Carolina. I manage accounts payable and receivable, payroll processing for 23 employees, and quarterly tax filings. My salary is $47,500 a year. I have been in this job for 4 years. I am good at it. I know the numbers, I know the vendors, I know which subcontractors invoice late and which ones pad their materials costs and which project managers are reliable about tracking change orders. I also know, because I work with money for a living, what $47,500 a year looks like after taxes and daycare and rent and car insurance and the credit card bills that accumulated during 2 years of trying to survive a divorce on a single income while also paying a lawyer. It looks like every month working and every month ending at approximately the same place you started, and the gap between where you are and where you need to be staying exactly the same size no matter how carefully you plan. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because the inheritance mattered. The number mattered. What it meant mattered. My grandmother, Ruth Moss, was my father's mother. She died in April, 8 months before that Christmas at 81 years old, in the same house in Concord where she had lived for 43 years. She had a small savings account, a paid-off mortgage, and a life insurance policy she had been paying into since 1972. When everything was added up, the estate came to approximately $186,000. She left it equally to her 2 grandchildren, half to my brother Dean, half to me. Dean was named executor. I want to say something about Grandma Ruth before I say anything about the money because the money is not the whole story and she deserves better than to be reduced to a figure on a settlement sheet. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall and she had a laugh that started somewhere in her stomach and came out of her before she could stop it, and she never seemed embarrassed by it. She called me every Sunday at 7:30 in the morning. Not 7 o'clock, not 8 o'clock. 7:30, because she said anyone who slept past 7:30 on a Sunday had already given up on the day. I never told her I was usually still in bed when she called. I just picked up and talked to her from under the covers while Ava slept in the next room and the apartment was still dark. She called me baby girl until the day she died. I was 37 years old and she called me baby girl, and I did not want her to stop. She knew about the divorce. She knew about the money problems that came after. She knew about the savings account and the lawyer and the check engine light and the pull-out couch I slept on for 6 months while Ava had the 1-bedroom because my daughter was 6 years old and 6-year-olds need a room. Ruth never gave me advice about any of it unless I asked. She just listened. She made sounds that communicated she was there, that she heard me, that she was not going anywhere. She never mentioned the will. She wasn't the kind of woman who used future money as leverage. But after she was gone, I found out she had updated it 2 years before she died, right after my divorce. She split it exactly down the middle. She didn't add conditions or qualifications or notes. She just wrote my name and Dean's name on a document and trusted that we would know what to do. I knew what $93,000 would mean for me and Ava. Pay off the credit cards, $18,000 in interest and late fees accumulated during 2 years of surviving on a bookkeeper's salary, while a divorce ground through the court system. Fix the car. Build a savings account that was more than one emergency away from empty. Maybe, if there was enough left after everything, make a down payment on a small house near Ava's school, because my daughter had been asking me quietly for 2 years, in the careful way she asks about things she's afraid the answer will be no, whether we were ever going to stop moving. I did not say any of this to Dean. I didn't have to. He knew. Dean Moss is 3 years older than me. He's 41 years old, and he works as a district sales manager for a medical device company, which means he drives a company car and flies to regional conferences and has a salary that comes with quarterly bonuses that he mentions in conversation just often enough to make you aware of them. He married Simone Garrett 12 years ago in a ceremony that my mother says was the most beautiful wedding she has ever attended, which she said at the reception and also at every family gathering for approximately 4 years afterward. They have a house in a neighborhood called Fieldstone Ridge outside Charlotte, bought in 2019 for $410,000. 2 cars. 2 boys, Caleb and Tyler, who are 12 and 10 and who are both in a competitive travel soccer league that requires practices 4 nights a week and tournaments twice a month. Simone manages the household schedule in a shared Google Calendar that she has color-coded by family member, and she talks about this system often enough that I understand it represents something important to her about who she is. None of this makes Dean a bad person. I want to be careful about that. He works hard, he provides for his family, he calls my mother twice a week, and when the furnace in her house made an unusual sound 2 winters ago, he drove out on a Saturday and diagnosed the problem before the repairman arrived. He is a reliable son and a present father and a man who, in most areas of his life, does exactly what he says he will do. What makes him difficult is the particular way he manages other people's expectations to match his own convenience, and the fact that he does it so smoothly that it takes you a while to notice he is doing it at all. He told me in May, when I asked about the estate timeline, that probate was taking longer than expected. In June he said the appraisers needed more time. In July there was a discrepancy in the property records that the attorney was handling. In August he told me, and I remember this sentence precisely because I wrote it in my journal that evening, to stop checking in because I was adding stress to an already complicated process. I stopped checking in. I kept driving my car with the check engine light on and kept building my monthly budget around a number that was already spoken for and hadn't arrived yet. And I told myself that Dean was handling it, and that the check would come, and that I just needed to be patient. November, he called me about the Christmas trip. He said our mother was having a hard time since Ruth died and maybe a family trip would help. He had found a great rate at a hotel in Charlotte. It would be nice to all be together. He'd cover the rooms. Early gift. Don't worry about it. I should have asked which account he was pulling from. I didn't ask. I was so genuinely grateful for the gesture that I just said thank you and started thinking about what to pack. Simone is the kind of person who communicates in small corrections. She is never unkind directly. She is precise. She notices when your roots need touching up and mentions it in a voice of gentle concern that makes it impossible to object without seeming overly sensitive. She has opinions about how children should hold their silverware at the table, and she voices those opinions to other people's children with a smile that functions as armor. You can't say anything back without looking like you're the unreasonable one. She and Dean have been married 12 years, and in 12 years of family gatherings I have never once heard her say something that could be read, without qualification, as an apology. She is very good at setting the terms of things before you realize terms are being set. My mother, Patricia Moss, is 64 years old. She lives alone in the house outside Concord where she and my father raised us. In a neighborhood that used to have children playing in the street, and now has Ring doorbells and for sale signs. My father has been gone 11 years. A heart attack at 57 that gave no warning and no farewell. And since then my mother has arranged her life around the nearest available warmth. The nearest available warmth is Dean. He is 40 minutes away. He calls twice a week. He shows up when things break. He includes her in birthday dinners and school events and neighborhood cookouts. I am 3 hours away and I call on Sundays, and I drive out every 6 or 8 weeks, and I come for every holiday I can manage, and the gap, the physical, practical, logistical gap, has slowly accumulated into something that looks from a distance like preference. I do not believe my mother loves Dean more than she loves me. I believe distance looks like absence when you're standing inside the loss of it. I believe my mother is a woman who survived 11 years of widowhood by staying close to the things and people that feel reliable, and Dean feels reliable because he shows up in person, and I show up on Sundays by phone, and those are two different weights on a scale that my mother doesn't know she's holding. I had a whole trip planned in my head on the drive down. The dinner, the morning presents, a walk along the waterfront if the weather cooperated. Ava and I had found a Christmas playlist on a streaming service that we played at low volume while she slept, and I sang along to the parts one knew quietly so I didn't wake her, and for 3 hours on the highway I let myself believe that this was going to be the version of Christmas that fixed something. We arrived at the hotel at 6 and met Dean and Simone and the boys in the lobby. My mother had come separately, an earlier train, and was already at the bar in the restaurant with a glass of white wine. She stood up when she saw us and held her arms open, and Ava walked straight into them, and I stood there watching my mother hold my daughter and feeling for a moment like maybe all the complicated things were going to quiet down long enough for us to just be a family eating a nice dinner on Christmas Eve. The hotel was genuinely beautiful. Lobby with 20-foot ceilings and dark walnut floors and acoustics engineered to make 40 people sound like 20. The Christmas tree in the center stood 15 feet tall and was decorated with gold ornaments and wide silk ribbon placed by someone who did that and nothing else for a living. The fireplace was real. When the bellman took our bags, he handled them the way you handle things that matter to someone. I kept the room cost in my head. 2 nights at the Ashford Grand, even with a corporate rate, was somewhere between $400 and $600. Food on top of that. I had looked at the rates online 3 weeks prior when Dean first floated the idea. I had noted the number and filed it under things that were covered because Dean had said covered. I had not asked for written confirmation. I had not asked whose name was on the reservation. When you're trying to hold a family together with gratitude and goodwill, you don't interrogate the logistics of kindness. You say thank you and you show up. Dinner was at a long table in the hotel restaurant reserved under Dean's name. White tablecloths, candles and glass holders, a centerpiece of pine branches and white flowers that had probably cost someone $200. The menu was printed on heavy cardstock with no prices listed on the dinner items, which is the restaurant equivalent of a locked door. It tells you that whatever is inside is not meant to be questioned. The first hour was fine. We talked about the hotel, about the drive, about a trip Ruth had taken to Virginia Beach in 1987 that my mother has been telling the same version of for 30 years, and which always ends with the detail that Ruth wore a yellow hat and everyone thought she was a celebrity. Caleb and Tyler were on their phones under the table. Tyler was stacking sugar packets when he wasn't. Ava ate every bite of her tomato soup and asked the server, very politely but very seriously, whether the bread came with real butter or margarine, because she is 10 years old and has strong feelings about butter. The food was good. The wine at the table was good. My mother talked and my brother talked and Simone asked Caleb something about his science project and for a while I sat there and thought, okay, this is okay. We can do this. Then Simone mentioned the cabin. She brought it up the way she brings up most things, sideways, wrapped in something adjacent to the real point. She was talking about real estate near their neighborhood, about a development going in 2 streets over, and she mentioned that property in that corridor had held its value through the last correction, and then she said they had actually been looking at a mountain property. A cabin outside Boone. Great investment opportunity if you got in early enough. I looked at Dean. He was cutting his steak. A cabin. For months after I had been told to stop asking about the estate because the estate was complicated, my brother was looking at a vacation cabin in the North Carolina mountains. I want to be fair about what I did next. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I set down my fork, I took a breath, and I said quietly across the table, Dean, what account are you looking at property with? His fork stopped. This isn't the time. I think it might be. Clara. My mother said my name in the tone she uses when she wants me to be smaller. Just the one word, my name, in a voice that has been asking me to make myself smaller for 38 years. Mom. It's been 8 months. The estate is still open. I stopped asking in August because Dean said it was adding stress, and now I'm sitting at a dinner table hearing about a cabin purchase. It's a conversation Simone and I are exploring, Dean said. It has nothing to do with the estate. Everything is taking a long time, I said. Since April. Every time I ask, there's a new explanation. I've been patient. You've been patient. Simone set her fork on the edge of her plate with a small, precise click. You sent 3 emails in August. After Dean specifically asked for space. I sent 3 emails asking for a timeline on money that was left to me by our grandmother. Clara. My mother again. One word. A closed door. I'm not trying to ruin dinner, I said. I'm trying to have a conversation we've been avoiding for 8 months. Dean set down his knife. He looked at me the way he's looked at me for 41 years when he has decided something is over. I've been managing Mom's grief. I've been handling probate on top of my actual job. And every single time we get in a room together you find a way to make it about this. It is about this. It's Christmas Eve. I know what day it is. He looked at Simone. Something passed between them, quick and efficient, the language of 2 people who have argued their positions before and don't need full sentences to do it. You've been miserable since we got here, he said. The kids can see it. Mom can see it. Do us all a favor and take the night. My mother did not look up. Simone gathered her purse. Dean pushed his chair back. The boys slid off their chairs and Tyler looked up from his phone with the expression of a child who has understood that something has happened but not what. Dean said something to the server about the bill going to the room. Room 814. His name. His reservation. The elevator doors opened. They got in. My mother looked back at me once from inside just for a moment, and I don't know what her expression was because I was looking at the floor. The doors closed. Ava put her hand in mine. Mom. I know, baby. Are we going to our room? I looked at the hostess stand, at the server who was already clearing the far end of the table, at the restaurant around us still full of other families having the version of Christmas Eve I had driven 3 hours expecting to have. I thought about the room key, about the fact that Dean had offered to handle the reservation and I had let him handle it and my name had never once been part of that conversation. Let's go sit by the fireplace for a minute, I said. We gathered everything from under our chairs, my overnight bag, Ava's small backpack, the 2 tote bags with her Christmas presents, and we walked out of the restaurant and across the lobby to the fireplace. I found a bench close enough to feel the heat and set our things on the floor in a pile between my feet, the practical arrangement of a person who doesn't know yet how long she will be staying in one place. Ava sat beside me. She tucked Mr. Nibbles under her chin and watched the fire. The lobby moved around us the way hotel lobbies move on Christmas Eve, guests arriving with bags, children in pajamas being steered toward elevators, A group of 4 adults in party clothes heading toward the bar. All of it lit warm and golden and entirely indifferent to the fact that my family had just walked away from me at dinner. I did the math I had not wanted to do. A room at the Ashford Grand on Christmas Eve, available this late, would be $350 at minimum and probably closer to $420. I had $1,140 in checking, with an orthodontist deposit due January 8th and a car insurance payment due the 3rd. I could cover a room. I could not cover a room and still cover January. I could call Dean. I could go up to room 814 and knock on the door and ask him to add me to the reservation. I could imagine how that would go. The door opening 6 inches. His face in the gap. The conversation we would have in the hallway with Ava beside me, and the boys audible through the wall. I could leave. Load everything into the car and drive 3 hours back to Concord and spend Christmas Eve on my pull-out couch in an apartment that still smelled like whatever cleaning product the previous tenant had used, which was not a smell I had ever managed to fully eliminate. I could call Daniel. Daniel is Ava's father. We don't talk often, but we talk when we need to, the way people do when they have divided a child between 2 lives and the only thing that still requires absolute cooperation is her. He was picking Ava up for Christmas morning anyway. I called him. He answered on the 3rd ring. Hey, change of plans on my end. Can you come get her tonight? I'll explain later. Yeah, I can do that. She okay? She's good. She's right here. Give me 2 hours. Take your time. We're in the lobby. I hung up and looked at Ava. Daddy's going to come get you early, okay? You'll be with him for Christmas morning and I'll see you the day after. She processed this with the particular seriousness she applies to logistical information. What about the presents? I'll bring them home. You'll open them when I see you. What about your room? I'm going to figure that out. She looked at me for a long moment, the way children look at you when they are measuring how much of the truth you are telling them. Are you okay? She said. 10 years old and asking the question like a physician. Level, direct, no softening of it. She has always been too perceptive for her own peace of mind, my daughter. I've been grateful for it and heartbroken by it in equal measure since the moment it first appeared in her, around age 4, when she would ask Daniel and me at dinner if we were happy. Not in a sad way but in the curious way of a scientist recording data. I'm okay, I said. Are you sad? A little bit. But I'm going to be fine. She thought about that. Then she leaned against my arm and looked at the fire, and that was her answer to all of it. Not more questions, not protest, just the warmth of herself pressed against my side, which was worth considerably more than the words either of us could have found. The lobby moved around us. The piano in the bar had started something slow and inevitable that might have been "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," or might have been something else entirely. I couldn't be sure from this distance. A woman near the concierge desk was crying quietly into her phone. A toddler in red-footed pajamas escaped from his father and ran directly toward the Christmas tree, and was caught before he reached it and swung into the air, laughing. A bellman pushed a cart loaded with luggage past our bench without looking at us, which is the professional courtesy of hotel staff. They don't look at the people who are sitting with all their things piled on the floor by a fireplace, because not looking is a form of dignity offered to people who need it. That is when I noticed the man in the wingback chair by the window. He had probably been there when we sat down. I hadn't registered him then, only as part of the furniture of the lobby, the chair, the window, the lamp. But now, 40 minutes into sitting with nothing to do but watch the room, I saw him as a person. He was sitting in one of the large velvet wingback chairs near the corner window, the kind of chair that requires your whole body to commit to it. He was sitting the way a person sits when they have been in chairs like that for a long time, not relaxed but settled the way a stone settles. No phone in his hand. No book, no newspaper. No coffee on the side table. His hands were folded in his lap and his eyes were on the dark glass of the window, which at this hour gave back nothing but the reflection of the lobby behind him. He looked to be in his late 70s. White hair, a full head of it, combed straight back from a face that had been handsome once and was now something better than that, interesting, particular, the kind of face that has collected weather and thought in roughly equal measure. A dark blue suit jacket, well cut but not new, with a small fold at the collar that had not been pressed out. His shoes were leather, polished but worn at the heel. His watch, just visible at his cuff, Was a plain silver thing without the oversized face or the complicated dial that watches carry now when they are trying to mean something. He had not moved since I first saw him. Nobody had approached him. The hotel staff moved through the lobby with the practiced invisibility of people managing a complicated room. They appeared exactly where they were needed and nowhere else. And this man in the wingback chair near the window apparently needed nothing, so they left him alone. He had been sitting there, by my estimation, for at least an hour. Possibly longer. Ava looked at him too. She was quiet beside me, very still, and then she said, in a voice low enough that only I could hear it, "Mom, is that man okay?" I looked at him again more carefully. His chin was slightly tilted forward. His hands, though folded, had a tightness to them that read as effort. I recognized the posture the way you recognize a kind of weather, the particular stillness of someone who has decided not to fall apart in a public place and is holding that decision actively moment by moment. "I don't know," I said. I told Ava to stay on the bench and I walked over. Up close he was older than he had appeared from across the lobby. The lines in his face were deep and evenly distributed, the kind that come from time and not from any failure to manage time. And his eyes when he looked up at me were a clear pale gray-green, sharp in a way that surprised me. The very old sometimes have eyes like that, clear and specific, as though age has worn away everything except the essential lens. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm sorry to bother you. I just noticed you've been sitting here for a while and I wanted to make sure you were all right." He looked at me for a moment. Not with suspicion, not with surprise. With the considered attention of someone who hears everything and responds to most of it slowly. "People don't usually notice," he said. His voice was low and a little rough at the edges, with a southern slowness to it that sounded like open windows and would smoke in an era where no one had to say things twice to be heard. "My daughter noticed first," I said. He looked past me to the bench, where Ava was watching us with Mr. Nibbles pressed to her chest. He raised one hand, just slightly in a small wave. She raised her hand back. "Perceptive child. She is." I paused. "Are you waiting for someone? Is there anything I can get you? I saw they have tea at the bar." He repeated the word quietly. "Tea. The way you repeat a word when it arrives at the right time. I haven't had a proper cup since this morning. I went to the bar and asked the bartender for a pot of tea." He looked at me with the brief professional assessment of a person deciding whether I was a guest, and then he made the tea without further question. I paid with my debit card. $7.50. I carried the small tray back across the lobby and set it on the side table beside the wingback chair. The man looked at the tray. He looked at me. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Merry Christmas." He poured his own cup, slowly and without hurry, and wrapped both hands around it the way you hold something warm when you are cold in a way that has nothing to do with temperature. "Sit down," he said. "If you have nowhere to be." I looked back at the bench, at Ava, at the pile of bags at our feet. "I have nowhere to be," I said, and I meant it as a fact, not a complaint, and I sat down in the chair beside him. He told me his name was Walter. He offered it without a last name and I didn't ask for one. We sat in that corner of the lobby and the fire burned across the room and the piano in the bar played whatever it was playing, and outside the window Charlotte did what Charlotte does on Christmas Eve, which is to look exactly like a city waiting for morning. After a few minutes Ava came over. She carried Mr. Nibbles and stood in front of Walter with the frank, unapologetic attention that children bring to people they find interesting. "What's your name?" she said. "Walter." "I'm Ava. This is Mr. Nibbles." She held up the rabbit for inspection. He considered Mr. Nibbles with appropriate seriousness. "He looks like a reliable companion. He's the best." She tilted her head. "Are you old?" "Ava," I said. "It's a fair question," Walter said. "Yes. I'm 79. Ava absorbed this information with the gravity it deserved. "That's very old." "It is. Do you have a stuffed animal?" "I have a dog. A golden retriever named Harrison. He's at home." "Does he miss you?" Something crossed Walter's face, then slow, quiet, the way a cloud moves across still water. Not sadness exactly. Something underneath sadness. Something that had been sitting there longer. "I imagine he does," he said. "Mr. Nibbles would miss me," Ava said. "That's why I bring him everywhere." She climbed onto the broad arm of his chair, sat on it with the confidence of a child who has not yet learned that furniture is not for sitting on in that way, and then climbed back down and went back to the bench, apparently satisfied with what she had found. Walter watched her go. He held his cup in both hands for a long moment without speaking. Then he said quietly, "How long has she had that rabbit?" "Since she was 2. She'll be 11 in March." I watched her settle back onto the bench, tuck Mr. Nibbles under her chin. She knows she's probably getting a little old for it. She takes him anyway. Good. He looked at his cup. We give up the things that ground us too fast. We call it growing up. Sometimes it's just loss we've agreed to call something else. I looked at him. He was not performing the observation. He was simply saying what he thought, the way people do when they're past the age of managing impressions. "You said you have family here," I said. "At the hotel. My son is here. With his wife and their children. Upstairs." "But you're down here." "I'm down here." He said it the same way I had said I have nowhere to be. A fact, not a complaint. I had the sense that behind those 4 words was a room of its own, a room I was not going to be invited into tonight. So I left it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "What happened at dinner?" He said it without apology, without the performed delicacy of someone pretending they haven't been watching. He was sitting close enough to the restaurant entrance that he had probably heard most of it. The way he said it suggested he had heard the shape of it, if not every word. I looked at my hands in my lap, thought for a moment about how to compress it. My brother is the executor of my grandmother's estate. I asked him at dinner why the distribution is still open 8 months later, and he heard it as an attack and told me to take the night. "And your room is in his name." "My room is in his name," I confirmed. Walter was quiet for a moment. "How much is the estate?" 93,000. "My half." He nodded. Not with surprise, not with judgment. With the nod of a man who has encountered many versions of this particular story, and has learned to hear the truth in the structure of it. "And what will you do with it? When it comes?" Nobody had ever asked me that. In all the months of waiting and asking and being told to wait longer, nobody had sat down and asked what I was actually trying to build. So I told him. The credit card debt. The car. The savings account that was more promise than substance. The down payment on a small house near Ava's school, so she could stop asking me quietly whether we were ever going to stop moving. I said it plainly, without apology, the way you say the truth when you're tired enough that performance seems like too much work. He listened to all of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions or opinions or the verbal equivalent of a pat on the head. He just listened the way someone listens when they understand that what the other person needs first is to be heard. When I finished, the lobby was quieter than it had been. The piano had stopped. A few couples moved toward the elevator bank. The bartender across the room was wiping down the counter in long, slow strokes. The fire behind its glass panel had burned lower, the logs settling into themselves. "You said you're a bookkeeper," Walter said. "For a construction company. 4 years. Do you like it?" The question surprised me. "I'm good at it." "That's not what I asked." I thought about it. I like the order of it. The way things have to balance. I like that the numbers don't lie. If they're wrong, they'll tell you eventually. There's something honest about that. I paused. I think I could like something more. I haven't gotten there yet. He looked at me for a moment with those clear gray-green eyes, measuring something I couldn't name. "No," he said. "I don't imagine you have." He set his empty cup on the tray. "Tell me something. When you came over to check on me tonight, what made you do it?" I thought about it honestly. My daughter noticed you first. And when I looked again, I recognized something. The way a person looks when they're holding themselves together in a public place and nobody can see how much work it is. You recognized it because you were doing it yourself. Probably. He nodded slowly. Most people walked past me tonight. A family over there. He gestured toward the far side of the lobby without looking, walked past me twice, and the second time the woman made eye contact and then looked away. The concierge glanced over once and decided I didn't need anything. You didn't flag anyone down. No. Why not? He was quiet for a moment. I was interested in what people would do without being asked. Something about the way he said it, the careful patience of the phrasing. The slight weight behind it made me want to ask a question I couldn't quite form yet. I let it go. Ava had fallen asleep on the bench. I could see her from where I sat, Mr. Nibbles pressed to her chest, her sneakers hanging off the edge of the cushion, her whole body having the particular looseness of a child who has surrendered completely to sleep. Her face was warm and orange in the firelight. "Your son is coming at 10, I said. "Her father." "Yes. She'll be all right tonight?" "She'll be with her dad. She loves Christmas mornings with him. He makes French toast and they watch old Christmas cartoons in their pajamas." I watched her sleep. "She's going to be completely fine. And you?" I looked at the fire. Thought about the room I didn't have. The morning I would have alone in a hotel lobby or a car or a room I could technically afford if I spent the money I needed for January. Thought about Dean upstairs in room 814 with the estate money, and the cabin brochure and my grandmother's name on a document that was taking 8 months to mean anything. "I'll figure it out," I said. Walter picked up the teapot and tilted it gently, checking whether there was any left. There wasn't. He set it down. "There may be something I can do about the room," he said. "Not urgently. Not as a performance of generosity. Just a quiet statement, the way you mention a practical fact." I looked at him. This man who had given me only a first name and a dog named Harrison and a cup of tea I had paid for myself. This man in his worn leather shoes and his good jacket that had not been pressed quite as flat as it once was. "Walter," I said. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't." He said it without any apparent discomfort with this fact. "But you brought tea to a stranger on Christmas Eve when you didn't have to. And you have a daughter who notices when old men are sitting alone by windows. That tells me more than most introductions do." I looked at the elevator bank. The closed brass doors. The lit numbers above them indicating floors I was not on and might not get to be on. I looked at my daughter on the bench, her chest rising and falling, Mr. Nibbles tucked under her chin. I looked at the fire. "What does it tell you?" I said. Walter folded his hands in his lap again, the same position he had been in when I first noticed him, except now it looked different, not effortful, just settled. A man who had arrived at rest. "It tells me," he said, "that I'm not the only one sitting down here tonight who deserves better than what they got." Outside the lobby windows, Charlotte was dark and cold and full of lights. The clock above the concierge desk showed 10:04. Daniel would be pulling up in the next 20 minutes. By midnight, it would just be me and this old man in the wingback chair and the fire burning lower and a lobby gone quiet enough to hear the clock above the concierge desk tick. I did not know then who he was. I did not know what morning would look like, or what the phrase "the whole floor" would come to mean to me in less than 14 hours. I did not know that the elevator bank across the lobby was about to become the most significant set of doors in my life, and that the people who had walked through them at 8:22 tonight were going to come back through them tomorrow morning to a world they had not prepared for. What I knew was this. A man named Walter had asked me to sit down, and for the first time since we'd walked through those revolving doors, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The lobby clock above the concierge desk showed 10:11 when Daniel's name appeared on my phone screen. I stood up and told Walter I needed to handle something, and he waved one hand in a small gesture that meant take your time without making anything of it. I went to the bench and touched Ava's shoulder gently. She came awake the way she always does, all at once, no confusion about where she was. "Daddy's here," I said. She sat up, found Mr. Nibbles where he had slid to the cushion beside her, and pulled him back under her arm. She looked at me, then at Walter across the lobby, then at the revolving door. "You're going to be okay," she said. "I'm going to be okay." She studied my face for a moment the way she studies everything, gathering data, verifying. Then she apparently decided I was telling the truth and started putting on her jacket. Daniel came through the revolving door at 10:14. He's a tall man, Daniel, and he moves through spaces the way tall people do when they've learned to be careful about it. He spotted us near the fireplace and came over, and I handed him Ava's backpack and the 2 tote bags with her presents. "Everything all right?" he said, low enough for just me. "It will be." He looked at the lobby, at the fireplace, at our overnight bags still sitting on the floor in the pile I hadn't moved. He's not a man who requires a full explanation before he understands a situation. He put the bags over his shoulder, held out his free hand to Ava. She took it, then turned back to me. She put her arms around my waist and held on, and I held her, and her hair smelled like the green apple shampoo she had used that morning in our apartment in Concord a lifetime ago. "See you day after tomorrow," I said. "Okay. I love you." "I love you too." She pulled back, looked at my face one more time. "Tell Walter I said goodbye." "I will." She took Daniel's hand and they walked toward the revolving door. And I stood there and watched the door turn and the cold night air come in for a second as they went through it. And then the door sealed again and the lobby was warm and quiet and it was just me. I stood there for a moment. Just stood. Then I went back to the chair beside Walter. "She said to say goodbye," I told him. He smiled. "The real kind, the slow kind. Remarkable child." "She worries about me," I said. "I don't know whether to be grateful for it or sorry." "Be grateful. People who worry about you are paying attention. The world has too few of those." He poured what remained in the teapot, the final half cup slightly cooled. "When did you last have someone in your corner like that? An adult, I mean." I thought about Margaret from the first inspiration story, then caught myself. I was in my own story. I thought about the question honestly. My grandmother. Before she died. The one with the estate. Ruth, yes. I said her name and felt the familiar weight of it. 8 months was not very long for a person you called every Sunday at 7:30 in the morning. She was the one adult in my life who said what she thought and meant what she said without agenda. When she thought I was handling something wrong, she said so plainly, and when she thought I was handling something right, she said that too. Rarer than it should be. Much rarer. We sat for a while without talking. This was something I noticed about Walter. He was comfortable with silence in a way that most people aren't. Most people fill silence because they're afraid of what it implies. Walter let it be a room between us. A space where things could settle without being handled. A couple checked in at the front desk, and their 2 children, maybe 8 and 10, ran immediately toward the Christmas tree and were called back by their mother in Spanish. The smaller one pressed her face against the glass panel of the fireplace, fogging it, and was pulled gently away by her father. The tree cast its warm gold light over all of them and they looked, for a moment, like a photograph of something very old and very simple. "Tell me about her," Walter said. "Your grandmother." So I told him. I told him about the Sunday calls and the yellow hat at Virginia Beach and the laugh that came out before she could stop it. I told him about the way she talked about my father, who died 11 years ago. Without the careful distance most widows put between themselves and their loss, she talked about him like he had just stepped out of the room for a moment and would be back. I told him about the house in Concord, the kitchen with the linoleum floor that lifted at the corner she covered with a bath mat rather than fixed because she said it kept things honest. I told him about the last Sunday I talked to her, 3 weeks before she died. When she had called at 7:30 like always and her voice was thinner than usual, but she talked for 45 minutes about a documentary she'd seen about the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies, which she said was the most miraculous thing she had learned all year, and she was 81 years old, so she had a long list to compete against. Walter listened to all of it. "She sounds," he said when I finished, "like a woman who paid attention to everything." She did. Those are the ones you miss the most. The ones who were actually looking. He said it without elaboration, and I had the sense that he was not speaking only about my grandmother. There was a specific weight behind the words personal and recent that told me he was speaking from the inside of his own loss. I didn't press. "What about you?" I said. "You mentioned you're 79. That's a full life. What did you do with it?" He looked at his empty cup for a moment. Then he settled back in the chair, the full weight of himself, and told me. He started in 1978. He was 33 years old, he said, and he had $8,000 in savings from 6 years working hotel management in Asheville, North Carolina, and a wife named Eleanor who said she believed in him before there was any evidence to support it. He put the $8,000 into the lease on a 12-room motor lodge on the edge of Asheville that had been failing since 1971, and had a parking lot full of weeds and a sign where 3 of the letters had blown off. He fixed the sign himself, pulled the weeds himself, and Eleanor painted the doors of the rooms a particular shade of blue that she chose out of a sample book on a Saturday afternoon, holding swatches up against the mountain light until she found the one that looked like it belonged to the place. He painted those doors on a Sunday in October, all 12 of them, while she brought him sandwiches and told him it was going to work. By 1983, he owned the motor lodge outright and had bought the property next door. By 1990 he had 4 properties. By 2001, 11. He did not say any of this with the particular pride of a man performing a biography. He said it the way you report the weather, one condition following another, each one making the next possible. Eleanor chose the name, he said. Ashford Hospitality Group. I thought it was too formal for what we had at the time. She said build toward the name, not toward what you have. She was right. She usually was. A pause. She died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I said I was sorry and I meant it. 8 weeks isn't long enough to say what needs to be said, he told me. But it's also too long when someone is suffering. You spend those weeks not knowing which thing to want. He said it plainly, without the practiced composure of grief that has been managed and presented for long enough to feel safe. He said it like a fact that still had sharp edges. The lobby had grown quieter around us as the evening deepened. The front desk had 1 clerk now instead of 3. The bar was down to a handful of people. The Christmas tree still burned its patient gold, but the room had taken on the particular quality of late-night hotel lobbies, the emptied, suspended quality of a space that is resting between one day and the next. Walter looked at the window. His reflection looked back from the dark glass. My son is here, he said. Robert. He runs the company now. Has for 4 years since I stepped back. But stepping back and stepping away are 2 different things, and Robert has not yet learned the difference. He was quiet for a moment. He's brought lawyers. 2 of them. They flew in this afternoon from Atlanta. He called it a holiday visit. He's been here since noon and we've had exactly 1 conversation about his mother and approximately 3 about a document he'd like me to sign. What kind of document? The kind that transfers my remaining shares in the company to a holding structure that Robert controls. He calls it estate planning. He brought a gift-wrapped bottle of scotch to go with the folder. I looked at him. The suit jacket. The worn shoes. The man who had been sitting alone by this window for 2 hours while his son was upstairs with lawyers and scotch and a folder. That's why you came down, I said. I needed air. The penthouse suite on the 14th floor has very good windows, but you can't open them. He said it without bitterness, just as observation. I came down at 8 and I've been sitting here since. My phone has rung 4 times. Robert's name each time. Did you answer? Once. I told him I was in the lobby and would be up when I was ready. He looked at his hands. That was 2 hours ago. I sat with that. The man who built 23 hotels across the Southeast was sitting in the lobby of his flagship property at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve alone, because his son had brought lawyers to a holiday dinner and the windows on the 14th floor didn't open. Do you want to sign it? I said. The document. He considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. I want to, he said. I built that company for 40 years. I built it with Eleanor and I built it for Robert and for his children after him. I want to trust that handing it over is the right thing. He paused. But the lawyers arrived before I did. That tells me something about the kind of handing over he has in mind. I looked at the fire. When I was doing the divorce, my lawyer told me something. He said the timing of a request tells you more than the request itself. He meant it about Daniel, but it applies to pretty much everyone. Walter turned to look at me. The timing of a request tells you more than the request itself. He repeated it slowly. Yes, that's exactly right. The lawyers arrived first, I said. The lawyers arrived first, he agreed. And Robert chose Christmas Eve, when it would be harder to say no. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. We sat in the quiet of it, this strange late-night company of 2 people whose families were upstairs not thinking about them, and the fire burned lower and the lobby clock showed 11:34. A door opened somewhere on the far side of the lobby. A young woman in a dark blazer came out, hotel staff. A manager by the way she moved, the particular efficiency of someone accountable for the whole room at once. She had a tablet in her hand and she was crossing toward the front desk when she glanced toward the corner by the window. She stopped. She looked at Walter. She looked at me. She looked back at Walter. Then she walked toward us. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was professional and calm, but underneath it was the very slight vibration of someone recalibrating on the move. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't aware you had come down. Is there anything I can get you? Anything at all?" Walter looked at her. "Priya." She softened slightly when he said her name. "Yes, sir. I'm the night manager on duty." "How long have you been with us?" "For years, sir. I started at the Asheville property." "How is the Asheville property?" "It's doing well. New breakfast program has increased weekday occupancy." She said it with the confidence of someone who actually knew, not someone reciting talking points. "We miss you at the quarterly reviews." "I miss them too." He paused. "Priya, this is Clara Moss. She's a guest of mine tonight. She needs a room." Priya turned to me with the same professional attention. "Of course. What size?" "The 414 suite," Walter said. "If it's available." Priya blinked once. A small recalibration. "It is available, sir. The Carolinas suite." "Good. Please make sure it's properly stocked. And add her room to my account." "Walter," I said. "That's not." "It is," he said. Settled, final, not unkind. "Priya, will you give us 5 minutes?" "Certainly, sir." She took 2 steps back and produced a small discreet distance that hotel managers are trained to provide and most people never learn to do naturally. I looked at Walter. "I can't let you pay for a room. You spent $7.50 on a pot of tea for a stranger on Christmas Eve. The least I can do is return the gesture." He looked at me steadily. "It's a room, Clara. Place to sleep. You've been sitting in this lobby holding your whole situation together for 3 hours without once making it anyone else's problem. Let this be easy." I looked at my hands, the overnight bag at my feet, the fire. I thought about the car with the check engine light. I thought about Ava asking me quietly for 2 years whether we were ever going to stop moving. I thought about my mother at dinner looking at her plate instead of me. "All right," I said. "Good." He raised his hand slightly toward Priya, who came back to us without being called a second time. "The Carolinas suite," he said. "For as long as Ms. Moss needs it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one." Priya handed me a key card and a small envelope with the hotel's name embossed on it in gold, and she said, "If there's anything you need overnight, please call the front desk directly and ask for me." And she meant it, the way people mean things when they know who is watching. The Carolinas suite was on the 14th floor. I didn't know when Priya said 414 and Walter nodded, that the 14th floor was the top floor. I didn't know that the Ashford Grand had only 2 suites on 14, both of which were held under a standing arrangement with the Ashford family for use by its principals and guests. I didn't know that the door to 1401 opened onto a room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking south over Charlotte, with a sofa and 2 armchairs and a dining table that seated 4 in a bedroom with a bed so large and white it looked like something you read about in a different kind of life. I know all of this now. That night I just walked in and set my overnight bag on the chair near the door, and sat on the edge of the bed in my red Target cardigan, and looked at the city through the window for a few minutes. Charlotte at midnight on Christmas Eve looked like a city that had set itself on fire very gently, building by building, until there was just enough light to see by without waking anyone. The buildings downtown were lit here and there, random windows, the particular human geometry of people who couldn't sleep or didn't need to. The highway in the distance was a slow red thread of taillights heading somewhere south. Above it all the sky was clear and very dark and full of more stars than you usually see from the middle of a city. I sat on the edge of that bed and looked at it and thought about Ruth. About what she would have made of this night, the lobby and Walter and the 14th floor and all of it. I thought she would have laughed first, her stomach laugh, the one she couldn't stop. Then she would have asked me what I was going to do about Dean and I would have said I didn't know yet and she would have said, "Well, you'll figure it out, baby girl, you always do." Called Ava. She was half asleep at her father's apartment, in the room he kept for her with the purple comforter and the shelf of chapter books. And she said, "Hi, Mom," in the slow slurred voice of a child 90% of the way back to sleep. "Just checking on you," I said. "I found a room. I'm okay." "Good," she said. And then, almost entirely asleep, "Tell Walter I said he should call Harrison." "I'll tell him. Good night, Mom." Good night, baby. She was asleep before I finished saying it. I set the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp, and the room went dark except for the city through the windows, and I lay in the largest bed I had ever been in on Christmas Eve, and I was, for the first time all day, genuinely warm. I slept. I woke at 7:08 to a city full of Christmas morning light, thin and white, and coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows at a low angle that made the room look like the inside of a snow globe. I lay there for a moment getting my bearings. The ceiling. The windows. The sound of Charlotte doing nothing because it was Christmas, and Christmas makes cities quiet in a specific way. A held-breath way. Like the city itself is waiting to see what the day brings. I showered and dressed. Put my red cardigan back on because it was what I had. Made coffee in the room's small machine and drank it at the dining table, looking at the city while the sky went from white to pale blue. I thought about Walter. About whether he had gone back upstairs after I left, or whether he had sat in that lobby chair until morning, the way you sit when the alternative feels worse than staying. I took the elevator downstairs at 8:15. The lobby on Christmas morning was a different organism than the lobby on Christmas Eve. Slower, softer, with the particular absence of urgency that very few mornings ever manage. The Christmas tree was still lit. The fireplace had been restarted at some point during the night, fresh logs. The front desk had a single clerk who was reading something on a tablet, and looked up when I came out of the elevator. Walter was in the same chair. He had changed a different jacket, dark gray, the same well-kept quality as the one before, and there was a cup of coffee on the table beside him that Priya or someone like her had brought without being asked. He was looking at the window, same as last night, except now the window showed Charlotte in the morning instead of Charlotte in the dark, and the difference was significant. He heard me cross the lobby and looked up. "Good morning," he said. "You slept here?" I said. "I went up around 2. Slept a few hours. Came back down at 7. He said it without drama. "Robert knows I'll come up when I'm ready. He's learned over the years that pressing me moves things backward." I sat in the chair beside him. The chair that had become, in less than 12 hours, a specific place in my mind, the way certain chairs acquire that quality, where you have sat in them during something that mattered. "Merry Christmas," I said. "Merry Christmas." He looked at me with those clear gray-green eyes. How was 414? It was the most beautiful room I've ever been in. Good. He sounded genuinely pleased. Eleanor designed the suite herself. She had a particular feeling about what a room at altitude should look like. Lots of light. Very little clutter. She said a room with too much furniture was a room that didn't trust its own view. She was right. Yes. He looked at the window. The morning. She usually was. We sat there together in the quiet of Christmas morning, the old man and the woman in the red cardigan, with our respective losses between us like furniture we had both learned to work around, and for a while neither of us said anything about Robert or Dean or lawyers or estates, because some mornings require a few minutes of just being in them before the day begins to pull. It was Priya who alerted me that the day was beginning. She appeared from the direction of the back offices at 8:47, moving with the specific purpose of someone who has received information and is managing the implications of it before they reach the room. She stopped beside Walter's chair. "Mr. Ashford, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Robert Ashford's party has asked for the breakfast room to be set for 8. They're coming down at 9. Walter looked at the clock above the concierge desk. 12 minutes. "Thank you, Priya." She glanced at me just briefly. The professional glance of someone calibrating. Then she went back to her host. Walter was quiet for a moment. He looked at his coffee cup. He set it down on the tray with a small deliberate click. "Clara," he said, "I want to ask you something before my son comes down." "All right. Last night you told me you're a bookkeeper. That you understand numbers. That you could like something more, you said, but you haven't gotten there yet." "That's right. What would more look like? If you could design it." I thought about this carefully. It was not a hypothetical question, and he was not asking it as one. The way he asked it had the quality of a question that was going somewhere specific. "More would look like using what I actually know," I said. "I understand how money moves through an organization. I understand where it gets lost and where it gets wasted and where the assumptions in a budget don't match what actually happens on the ground. I've been doing this for a construction company for 4 years, And I see the same structural problems every quarter that nobody addresses because addressing them would require admitting they existed. I paused. I think I could do more than reconcile accounts. I think I could look at the whole shape of something and tell you what's actually happening inside it. Walter listened to all of this. His hands were folded in his lap. He was looking at me in the way I had come to recognize as his listening expression, not passive, not neutral, but actively gathering. When you came over last night, he said, and sat with me in this lobby and spent $7.50 on a pot of tea for a stranger, was any part of that a calculation? No. Why not? You've told me you're careful with money. You're watching every dollar against what January looks like. Because calculations are for situations that are about you, I said. That wasn't about me. You were a person sitting alone on Christmas Eve and that mattered more than $7.50. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started to wonder if I had said something wrong. Then he said, Eleanor used to say that the real test of a person's character is not what they do when they're being watched. It's what they do when they're already losing something. I sat with that. Last night you were losing Christmas with your daughter, losing the confrontation with your brother, losing the room you thought you had. And what you did was bring an old man a cup of tea. He looked at me steadily. I've been in this business for 46 years, Clara. I have interviewed hundreds of people for hundreds of positions. I have been right about people and wrong about people in roughly equal measure. What I've learned is that the first 3 minutes of meeting someone tells you almost nothing. What they do when they don't know they're being evaluated tells you everything. I looked at him. Did Eleanor teach you that? I said. She lived it. He smiled, the slow real one. She also would have ordered 2 cups of tea. She never did anything by halves. The elevator across the lobby chimed. We both looked. The doors opened and 3 people stepped out. The first was a man in his early 50s, tall, in a charcoal suit that was too formal for Christmas morning but not formal enough to be a joke, with the particular grooming of a man who allocates a specific percentage of his income to the way he appears. Behind him, a woman of roughly the same age in a cashmere wrap, her dark hair pulled back precisely. And behind them both, 2 men in their 30s with laptop bags over their shoulders who were clearly not family. The lawyers. The man in the charcoal suit scanned the lobby with the practiced efficiency of someone who manages environments by locating the variables quickly. He found Walter within 3 seconds. Robert Ashford crossed the lobby the way his father did, not with the forward velocity of a man accustomed to rooms adjusting to him rather than the other way around. Dad. He stopped beside the chair. He glanced at me, a professional glance, quickly categorizing. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Robert. Walter did not stand up. He stayed in the chair, hands folded, looking at his son with an expression that was entirely neutral and entirely watchful at the same time. We were waiting for you upstairs. I know. Robert's wife, whose name I would learn was Catherine, not the same Catherine, just the coincidence of names that the world produces, gave me a small polite smile and stood slightly behind her husband, the way people stand when they are doing their best to be present without being part of what is about to happen. Who's your friend? Robert said. He said it lightly, the tone of a man making conversation, but his eyes were doing the same categorizing work they had done when he first crossed the lobby. This is Clara Moss, Walter said. She's a guest. A guest. Robert absorbed this. In what sense? In the sense that she's staying in 414 and she's had coffee this morning and we've been talking. Walter's voice stayed even. Unhurried. In the ordinary sense of the word guest, Robert. Robert's jaw did a small thing, a tightening quickly managed. He looked at me again. 414. Yes, I said. That's the Carolinas suite. Priya said something about that, I said. The 2 men with laptop bags had set themselves up at a table near the entrance to the restaurant with the efficient purposelessness of people being paid to be available. Catherine was looking at the Christmas tree. Robert was looking at his father. Dad, can we go upstairs? We have some things to go over this morning. I'm aware. The attorneys flew in from Atlanta. I'm aware of that too, Robert. I was there when you told me. Walter looked at the elevator. Looked back at his son. Sit down for a moment. Robert sat. He sat in the chair where I had sat last night, and it looked different under him, stiffer, less settled. The chair of a man who sits in furniture without ever quite inhabiting it. I'm going to tell you something, Walter said. And I'd like you to hear it before we have any conversations about any documents. Robert's expression went carefully neutral. The lawyer version of a face. Last night I came down to this lobby because I needed to breathe. I sat in this chair for 2 hours. Nobody from this hotel asked me if I needed anything. Nobody from upstairs came to check on me. Nobody. He paused. Except this woman, who is not an employee of this hotel, who is not family, who did not know my name or my position or anything about me except that I was an old man sitting alone by a window on Christmas Eve. She brought me tea. She sat with me. She introduced me to her daughter, who is 10 years old and carries a stuffed rabbit, and told me I should call my dog. Robert looked at me. Something was happening behind his eyes that he was not yet letting reach his face. I am telling you this, Walter said, because the document you want me to sign is about trust. And I have spent the last 46 years learning the difference between the people who are trustworthy and the people who perform trustworthiness. The difference is usually visible in exactly the kind of moment I described. The unscripted ones. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Dad, I understand you don't yet, Walter said. But that's all right. You will. The elevator chimed again. I looked toward it the way you look at a door when you know who's on the other side. Dean came out first. He was wearing a Christmas sweater, the genuine variety, with a reindeer pattern, the kind that signals to a room that you are a person who takes holidays seriously and wants credit for it. Simone followed him in dark pants and a red blouse, the boys behind her in matching plaid shirts that told me she had planned this outfit 3 weeks ago, and packed it specifically. My mother came last, in a green cardigan and the pearl earrings she saves for occasions. They were talking. Dean and Simone were talking the way people talk when they have had a good night's sleep and a room on someone else's account and Christmas morning feels uncomplicated. Tyler said something and Caleb laughed, and my mother adjusted her earring and said something I couldn't hear from across the lobby. They were heading for the restaurant. The breakfast buffet that opened at 9, which Dean would have checked the night before because Dean checks everything that relates to a schedule. My mother saw me first. She stopped walking. The group behind her staggered slightly. The small chain reaction of people in a line when the person at the front stops unexpectedly. Simone followed her gaze. Then Dean. He looked at me sitting in the lobby with his father's tea tray on the table beside me, in a chair across from a man in a charcoal suit and 2 lawyers with laptop bags, in a hotel where he had told me to take the night. His expression went through several things in quick succession. Surprise. Recalibration. The particular blankness of a man trying to read a room he has just realized is more complicated than he thought. Clara, my mother said. She crossed the lobby toward me with the particular walk of a woman who has decided that whatever is happening can be managed with enough warmth applied quickly enough. Good morning. Where did you sleep last night? Upstairs, I said. She glanced at the ceiling at the elevator back at me. Which room? 1414, I said. Which was not the right number, it was 1401, but my mother didn't know the difference and neither did Dean, not yet. Dean had stopped walking. He was looking at Robert Ashford, who was looking at Walter, who was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who has arranged a room and is waiting for the right moment to speak in it. Simone touched Dean's arm. The same touch as last night at dinner. He looked at her, looked at his boys, looked at me. How did you get a room last night? He said. Someone helped me, I said. Dean looked at Walter. At Robert. At the 2 men with the laptop bags. At me in the chair that had been mine since 11 o'clock last night. The lobby was very quiet. The Christmas tree burned its patient gold. The fire in the fireplace crackled once. A sound like a single word spoken into a room full of people waiting for someone to speak first. It was Walter who spoke first. He looked up at Dean with those clear gray-green eyes, unhurried, taking his time. You must be the brother, he said. Dean's face did something complicated. I'm sorry. The brother, Walter said. Clara mentioned you last night. He paused. Several times. He said it without edge, without malice, the way you state a fact that happens to be inconvenient for the person hearing it. Just yes, she mentioned you. Just I know what this room is. Dean looked at me. My mother looked at me. Robert Ashford looked at his father. And I sat in my chair on Christmas morning in my red cardigan and looked at none of them in particular, because I was looking at the fire, which was burning steadily and warm, the way fires burn when they have good wood and enough air, and nothing in the world is asking them to be anything other than what they are. Walter set his coffee cup down on the tray. He looked at Robert. "I'll come upstairs," he said. "But I'd like Clara to join us." Robert's face went through the same several things Dean's had gone through, compressed into a shorter sequence. "Dad, the attorneys are." "I know where the attorneys are," Walter said. "I'd like Clara to join us." He said it the second time the same way he had said it the first, not louder, not harder, just repeated, with the patience of a man who is used to being heard eventually and does not feel the need to escalate to make it happen. Robert looked at me. I looked at Walter. My mother made a small sound that was not quite a word. Walter stood up from the chair. He did it in the way of a man who has been sitting for a long time and takes his time rising, without apology for the time it takes. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the lobby the way a man looks at a room he built from something smaller than it used to be. Then he looked at me. "Come," he said. "Let's go upstairs." I stood up. I picked up my key card from the table where I had set it. I followed Walter Ashford toward the elevator bank of his own hotel, and behind me I could feel Dean watching, and my mother watching, and Simone and Robert, and all of it. The whole accumulated weight of the night and the morning and the inheritance and the 3-hour drive and the dinner table and the room key that hadn't existed. The elevator doors opened. Walter stepped in. I stepped in beside him. The doors closed. In the small mirrored quiet of the elevator, he looked at the numbers above the door beginning to climb and said, without looking at me, "I should have told you this last night. I meant to. But the conversation was better than I expected, and I didn't want to change what it was." "Told me what?" He watched the numbers. 345. "My name is Walter Ashford," he said. "I founded this hotel. I own this building. I own 22 others like it, from Asheville to Savannah." He paused. "And I would very much like to talk to you this morning about what comes next." 678. I stood in the elevator beside him and looked at the numbers and thought about Ruth calling me at 7:30 every Sunday, about the check engine light on my car, about Ava asking me quietly whether we were ever going to stop moving, about a lobby bench and a pot of tea that cost $7.50 and the way a key turns in a lock you forgot you had. 9, 10, 11. "All right," I said. 12, 13, 14. The doors opened. The 14th floor did not look like the rest of the hotel. The elevator opened onto a short private corridor with dark wood paneling and a carpet that went from firm to soft under your feet the moment you stepped off. There were 2 doors, one at each end of the corridor, both of them plain dark wood with brass numbers, none of the hotel standard plastic plates. No ice machine. No housekeeping cart. No vending alcove. Just the corridor, the 2 doors, and a narrow window at the far end that showed the Charlotte skyline in the full unobstructed width of Christmas morning. Robert had come up in the second elevator with Catherine and the 2 lawyers, and they were waiting in the corridor when Walter and I arrived. Robert looked at the space between his father and me, a space of approximately 3 feet, with the expression of a man trying to determine the meaning of a geometry he hadn't anticipated. "Dad," he said, and the word had a different weight up here than it had in the lobby. Lower. More careful. "Robert." Walter moved to the door at the end of the corridor. 1401, the Carolina suite, which I had slept in and which now I realized was the room Walter himself kept at the hotel. He unlocked it with a key card he produced from his jacket pocket and pushed the door open and walked through without looking back to see if anyone was following, because he was a man who had walked through doors first for a very long time and it had simply become the way he moved. We followed. The suite in daylight was something else entirely. The floor-to-ceiling windows I had stood at midnight with Charlotte burning below me now showed the same city washed white and blue in December sun, every building edge sharp, the sky behind them the specific pale blue of cold clear mornings. The room was large but not ostentatious, no gold fixtures, no excessive ornamentation. Eleanor's design philosophy, I would understand later, was about quality of light and quality of silence. Every surface was there because it earned its place. Walter sat in the armchair near the window. Not the sofa, not the seat at the head of the dining table that would have communicated authority in a different way. The armchair, a wingback in a dark green fabric, the chair of a man who was at home. "Sit down," he said. All of you. Robert and Catherine took the sofa. The two lawyers, Marcus and a younger man named Trent who had not yet said a word in my presence, arranged themselves at the dining table with their laptops and a manila folder that had the word draft printed across the top in the careful font of documents that are trying to look less serious than they are. I took the armchair across from Walter, which was either the right thing to do or the wrong thing, and since nobody objected I decided it was right. Dad, Robert said once everyone was arranged, I want to understand what's happening. Who is Ms. Moss? I told you in the lobby. You said she was a guest. In Eleanor's suite. That's right. That suite is for family. I know what the suite is for. I arranged the suite, Robert. 32 years ago, Eleanor and I sat in this room on a Friday night, and she told me what color she wanted the walls and how she wanted the windows to face and why the chairs should be this particular shade of green. He looked at the chair he was sitting in. I think I can decide who sleeps in it. Robert's jaw did its small tight thing. The same thing Dean's jaw had done at dinner last night when he'd decided the conversation was over. There was something almost sad about recognizing the same gesture in two different men who had never met each other. I just think, Robert said carefully, that before we get into anything else we should probably establish context. The context, Walter said, is that I came downstairs last night at 8 o'clock and I sat in my lobby for 2 hours and not one person who works for this company came to check on me. The context is that the only person in that building who acted like another human being was this woman, who is a bookkeeper from Concord, North Carolina, who spent $7.50 from a budget she could not afford on a pot of tea for a stranger. He paused. That is the context. The younger lawyer Trent had stopped typing. Robert looked at me with the expression of a man revising a calculation mid-problem. I appreciate that, Ms. Moss. That's genuinely kind. But I'm not sure I understand what it has to do with. It has to do with everything, Walter said. Because everything I'm about to decide today has to do with what kind of company this is. And what kind of company this is depends entirely on what kind of people are running it. The room was quiet. Outside the window Charlotte went about its Christmas morning, entirely indifferent to the conversation on the 14th floor. The document, Walter said, and Marcus the lawyer sat up slightly. I've read it. All 41 pages, including the addendum about the Asheville property. Robert's expression did something small and involuntary. Flicker. The kind that tells you someone had hoped something would go unread or at least unmentioned. The Asheville property, I said before I could stop myself. Walter looked at me. You know the one. The motor lodge. Where it started. You said you painted the doors yourself. I painted all 12 of them on a Sunday in October with Eleanor handing me sandwiches. He looked at Robert. The document proposes transferring the Asheville property to a separate LLC with authorization to sell within 18 months. That property has been in this company since 1978. Eleanor's name is in the original deed. Robert leaned forward. Dad, that property runs at a loss. It has for 4 years. It's a 12-room motor lodge on a highway that's been rerouted twice. Commercially, it makes no sense. It makes every sense to me, Walter said. And I own 52% of this company, which means my sense of things still matters. I know that. That's why I want to structure this properly. This isn't about taking anything from you. It's about protecting what you built for the long term. The estate planning attorneys are very clear that the current structure creates unnecessary exposure. The current structure, Walter said, is the one that took $8,000 in 1978 and turned it into what you flew 2 attorneys from Atlanta to sit at a dining table and discuss on Christmas morning. He said it without sharpness, just clearly. I'm not signing the document as written. Robert sat back. A contained exhale. Dad, I'll sign a revised version. With the Asheville property specifically excluded from any transfer or sale authorization, and with a clause establishing the Eleanor Ashford Foundation as a separate endowed entity. The foundation, Robert said, not as a question, as a recognition of something he had been expecting but hoping to postpone. $3 million. Endowed from my personal holdings, not from the company, to support financial stability programs for working families, homeownership, debt recovery, The kind of thing your mother spent 40 years saying we should do once we had enough, and then we always had enough and we always found a reason to wait. He looked at the window. We're done waiting. The younger lawyer Trent typed something quietly. Marcus, the senior lawyer, looked at Robert. Robert looked at the table. Who would run it? Robert said finally. Clara would run it, Walter said. The room accommodated this sentence with difficulty. Robert looked at me directly for the first time since we'd all sat down. Not hostilely. With the genuine, slightly uncomfortable attention of a man who has just learned he misjudged the geography of a room. Miss Moss, he said. You're a bookkeeper. I am, I said. For a construction company. For years. Accounts payable, receivable, payroll, quarterly taxes for a company with 23 employees and variable project timelines. I know how money moves and where it goes when it shouldn't. That's good. That's a solid background. But running a foundation is a different scale entirely. The compliance requirements, the grant-making process, the board governance. I know, I said. I'd need to learn the specific mechanics. The principles are the same as any budget management. Where the money goes reflects what you actually value, not what you say you value. Those two things are almost never the same, and the gap between them is where foundations either do real work or perform the appearance of it. A silence. Trent had stopped typing entirely. Robert looked at his father. Walter was looking at me with the expression I had come to recognize from the lobby, the one that said he was filing something away. She's been talking like this since last night, Walter said. Robert turned the folder on the table toward him slowly, not opening it. Dad. I hear you. I do. But this is significant. Committing $3 million to a foundation based on a night's conversation in a hotel lobby. I have had 46 years of conversations, Walter said. I know what a conversation sounds like when someone is showing me who they are versus when someone is showing me who they want me to think they are. He looked at his son. Last night I sat alone in my lobby for 2 hours. You called me 4 times. Clara came over and asked if I was all right. That's the whole story, Robert. That is the sum total of the information I needed. Robert looked at his hands. He was a man trying to find the argument that worked, sifting through the available options the way you sift through keys when you've forgotten which one fits. It's a lot to ask me to just accept, Dad. On Christmas morning. I know, Walter said. And then more quietly. I know it is. I'm also asking you to accept that I'm not yet finished being useful. That handing over the company doesn't mean handing over my judgment. I built this with your mother, Robert. The foundation is for her. And the person who runs it is going to be someone I trust the way I trusted her, because they showed me something true about themselves when they had nothing to gain. The room was very quiet. Outside, the winter sun moved slightly, the way it does in the late morning, and the light through the window shifted a degree, touching the edge of the dining table and the corner of the green armchair where Walter sat, and for just a moment the whole room was the color of the afternoon Eleanor had picked for the doors of a 12-room motor lodge in 1978. All right, Robert said. He said it the way a man says it when he has decided that the argument he was going to make is not worth what it would cost. All right, Dad. We'll revise the document. Walter nodded. We'll revise it today. I want it done before we go home. Robert looked at Marcus and Marcus opened his laptop. Trent opened his. The room reorganized itself around the practical work of what came next, and Walter looked at me across the space between our 2 chairs and said nothing, just looked, and I looked back, and I thought about $7.50 and Eleanor and the color of 12 doors on a Sunday in October, and what it means to build something starting from less than anyone thought was enough. I'll need a day or 2, I said, when the lawyers were absorbed in their screens, to give you an answer. Of course, Walter said. Take what you need. I'll have questions. About the foundation scope, the reporting structure, the compensation. You should have questions. I'd be concerned if you didn't. And I'll need to talk to Ava. He smiled. The real one. Obviously. She has better judgment than most people I've employed. I looked at the city through the windows. Charlotte in its Christmas morning quiet. The highway in the distance, the thin red thread of last night now replaced by something sparser. The occasional car moving through a city that was mostly still. The Asheville property, I said. Can I ask why it matters so much to you? He was quiet for a moment. Because Eleanor painted those doors. Because the first guest who ever stayed at our hotel was a woman named Mrs. Adeline Corby, who was 71 years old and was driving to see her daughter in Georgia, and her car broke down outside Asheville at 9 in the evening. I drove her to a repair shop myself the next morning. She sent us a card at Christmas that year. And every year for 11 years after that, until she died. He looked at the window. I still have the cards. All 11 of them. In a box in the house. I thought about Ruth's Sunday calls. About the things we keep because they are too specific to mean anything to anyone but us, and that specificity is exactly what makes them precious. You should keep it, I said. The property. I intend to. The lawyers typed. Catherine refilled her coffee at the small sideboard. Robert leaned over Marcus's shoulder and pointed at something on the screen, and they had a quiet, technical conversation about language. The document was being revised in real time on Christmas morning, on the 14th floor of the Ashford Grand, because an old man had sat alone by a window and a woman in a Target cardigan had brought him tea. I sat in Eleanor's green armchair and looked at the city and thought. Ruth would have laughed. Then she would have said, well, of course she would, she was always looking. At 11:30, I took the elevator downstairs. The lobby had filled up with Christmas morning life families checking out. Children in pajamas being photographed in front of the tree. A front desk now staffed by 3 clerks moving at the holiday pace that is faster than it looks. The breakfast buffet in the restaurant was in full swing, the sound of it just audible from the lobby, the particular collective sound of a room full of people eating and talking and being where they planned to be. Dean was at a table near the window. He was alone. Simone and the boys were at the buffet. The boys loading plates with a systematic enthusiasm that suggested they had been given full authority over their selections. My mother was beside Simone, holding a plate, saying something about the pastry display. I almost walked past. I could have. The morning had already required a great deal from me, and I had a ride home to arrange and a call to Daniel to make and a job offer to think about that had not stopped turning in my mind since the elevator doors closed 14 floors above me. I stopped. I walked to Dean's table and sat down across from him. He had a cup of coffee and a plate with eggs and toast that he had mostly not touched. He looked at me. He looked at the eggs. He looked at me again. 414 is the Carolina suite, he said. It's on the top floor. I know. Who is he? The man in the lobby. His name is Walter Ashford. Ashford. Dean said it and I watched the name land and the implications of the name arrange themselves in his expression. As in the hotel. As in the hotel. As in the company. As in 46 years building 23 properties from a 12-room motor lodge in Asheville with $8,000 and his wife's faith. Dean was quiet. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down without drinking. He was alone in the lobby last night, I said. For 2 hours. His son brought lawyers for a holiday visit, and he came downstairs to breathe and nobody from the hotel checked on him. He'd been sitting there since 8. And you checked on him. Ava noticed him first. Dean looked at the tablecloth. A long moment. I didn't know you didn't have a room, he said. I looked at him. Yes, you did, Dean. He didn't argue. That told me more than an argument would have. The room was in your name, I said. You handled the reservation. You've handled everything related to the estate since April, and every time I've asked a question you've managed me out of the conversation. Last night was the same thing at a different table. His jaw moved. I waited for the familiar sequence, the careful framing, the recontextualization, the version of the story in which his behavior was reasonable and mine was excessive. I had watched him run that sequence for 38 years. He didn't run it. I needed more time with the property, he said. The cabin. I know that's. He stopped. I know how it sounds. How does it sound, Dean? He looked at the window. The Charlotte Street outside, where a man was walking a dog and the dog was very interested in a patch of something near the curb. Like I used her money to look at something I wanted, he said. He said it quietly. Without the management. Just the fact stated plainly, by a man who had been carefully avoiding it for 8 months and had apparently run out of terrain to avoid it on. I sat with it for a moment. I let it be what it was. I want my share of the estate, Dean, I said. I want what Ruth left me. I want it by the end of January, and I want the full accounting of what's been spent from the estate account since probate opened. I'm not angry, I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you what I need. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who has been called to account by someone who has earned the right to do so, and is doing it with less heat than he deserves. You'll have it, he said. I believed him. Not because of Walter. Not because of anything that had happened on the 14th floor that morning. I believed him because Dean, underneath everything, underneath the management and the maneuvering and the years of making himself the reasonable one, was a man who had a conscience that occasionally got loud enough to hear. It had apparently gotten loud this morning. Thank you, I said. I stood up. I was about to leave when he said my name. Clara. I turned. He looked at his eggs. Then at me. I'm sorry. About last night. The room and in all of it. He said it like a man who was not used to saying it and was not particularly comfortable with how it felt. I recognized the discomfort and I respected it, because the comfortable apologies are almost never the real ones. I know, I said. My mother found me at the concierge desk 10 minutes later, where I was asking about the earliest checkout and car arrangement on Christmas morning. She came to stand beside me, and she had that look, the complicated one, the one she gets when she has understood something about a situation and doesn't yet know what to do with the understanding. She waited until the concierge had finished with me. Then she said, How long did you sit in that lobby? From about 8:30 until after 11. She made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound. The kind that acknowledges something without claiming to fully know what it is. I should have come back down, she said. Yes. I thought you'd work it out with Dean upstairs. You knew I didn't have a room key. She was quiet. The concierge behind the desk attended to something on his screen with great concentration. I knew, she said. I looked at her. 64 years old, green cardigan, pearl earrings. The woman who had driven me to school and braided my hair for picture day, and held my hand during thunderstorms when I was small enough to believe she could keep the weather away. The same woman who had looked at her plate at dinner last night instead of me. Mom, I said. I'm not going to pretend last night was all right. It wasn't. But I'm also not going to spend Christmas morning in a fight with you. She looked at the Christmas tree across the lobby, the same one Ava had pointed at when we walked in, with such certainty that nothing could go wrong. She really is something, that girl, my mother said. Ava. She is. She looks like you did at that age. The eyes. Ruth always said that. The name of her own mother hung between us. My mother's face did something soft and unexpected. I miss her, Patricia said. I know. So do I. We stood there at the concierge desk in the lobby of a hotel we had each occupied very differently, and for a moment we were just two women who missed the same woman on Christmas morning, and that was the most honest thing we had said to each other in several years. I put my hand briefly on my mother's arm. She put her hand over mine. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then I went to make arrangements for my car and she went back to the buffet, and we were ourselves again, complicated, unresolved, in the process of something that didn't have a name yet and probably wouldn't for a while, but for those 2 seconds we had been something simpler, and I held on to that. I drove home to Concord at 2 in the afternoon. The highway was quiet the way highways are on Christmas afternoon, generous and empty, the world mostly indoors, and I drove with the radio off and the heat on and the check engine light glowing its steady orange from the dashboard like a small patient reminder of everything still unresolved. I thought about the 14th floor. About Walter in the green chair talking about Eleanor and the motor lodge doors, and Mrs. Adeline Corby who broke down outside Asheville and sent Christmas cards for 11 years. About Robert and the revised document and what it meant to build something for 46 years and then have to decide what it was worth and to whom. I thought about the foundation. I thought about what I had said in that room about money going where values are, and the gap between stated values and actual ones being where the real work happens. I had said it because I believed it. I had believed it before I had any reason to be sitting in a suite on the 14th floor saying it. That was the thing about the truth. It doesn't change depending on who's in the room. I called Ava at 3:30. She was at Daniel's, full of French toast and Christmas morning cartoons, describing in elaborate detail the exact nature of the gifts she had received and the specific way she had organized them on her shelf. She had gotten a book about marine biology and a telescope kit and a new composition notebook with a bird on the cover that she had immediately decided would be for important thoughts only. How was the hotel? She asked. I thought about where to start. It was interesting, I said. Did Walter go back upstairs? Eventually. Is he okay? He's okay. He had some family stuff to work out. Like we did. A little bit like that. She was quiet for a moment. The comfortable thinking quiet. Mom, did something good happen? I smiled at the road. At the empty Christmas highway and the check engine light, and the green cardigan on the passenger seat where I had folded it because I had changed into my jacket for the drive. Maybe, I said. Tell me when you know for sure. You'll be the first call. Okay. A pause. Mom. Yeah. Next Christmas can we have a real fire? In a fireplace somewhere? I'll work on that, I said. Cool. She went back to her marine biology book and I drove the rest of the way home with the windows cracked and the cold air coming in and the feeling of something that had not yet fully arrived but was clearly on its way. Walter called on the 27th. I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going through the mail that had accumulated a utility notice, a credit card statement, a postcard from a dentist's office reminding me about a cleaning I already knew I needed and had been postponing. He said good morning and asked if I had thought about the foundation. I told him I had thought about almost nothing else. He asked what my questions were. I had written them in a notebook the day after Christmas, sitting at this same table in 2 columns, things I needed to understand and things I needed to know about myself before I could answer yes to anything. The first column was practical scope of the foundation's work, reporting structure, board composition, the compensation he was offering and what it came with. The second column was harder to quantify. Whether I was capable of something this size. Whether saying yes was ambition or foolishness. Whether the difference between those two things was something I could determine in advance or only in retrospect. I read him the first column over the phone. He answered every question. The foundation's focus would be financial stability for working families, homeownership support, debt management programs, working in partnership with county housing agencies in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia to start. The board would have 7 members, 3 of whom Walter would name and 3 of whom I would help select, with a 7th independent member. My compensation would be $89,000 a year with full benefits and an annual review. I would have an office at the Ashford Grand Charlotte, on the 3rd floor, in the suite of rooms that had been underused since the company's administrative hub moved to Atlanta 4 years ago. And the second column, he said. I looked at him down the phone line. How did you know there was a second column? Because you're careful, he said. Careful people always have a second column. I looked at the kitchen table, the coffee cup, the utility notice, the credit card statement with its accumulated interest from the years of surviving a divorce on a salary that was not designed to do it. I'm not sure I'm qualified, I said. You said that very quickly, he said. Meaning you've been saving it. I've been examining it. And I think it's true that I've never run a foundation. I think it's also true that most of what a foundation does is what I've been doing in smaller rooms for 4 years, tracking where money goes against where it was supposed to go and naming the distance between those two things honestly. I think the gap between what I've done and what this requires is real but not disqualifying, he said. Not disqualifying, I agreed. Clara, I've had the people who were technically qualified running things for me for 20 years. They have the credentials and the vocabulary and the conference circuit connections, and they know every grant-making framework that exists. They also know how to produce reports that demonstrate impact without ever getting close enough to the work to feel it. He paused. Eleanor used to say that the most dangerous thing in philanthropy is expertise at describing problems you've never had. I want someone in that office who has had the problems. I was quiet for a moment. All right, I said. Yes. He was quiet on his end too. Not with surprise. With the quiet of a man who had been waiting for the answer and received it as expected. Good, he said. I'll have my attorney send the offer letter by the end of the week. We'll aim for a February start. That gives you time to handle your transition at Alderman. Yes. And Clara. Yes. The estate. Has your brother been in touch? He called the 26th. His attorney is preparing the final accounting. He said he'd have the check by the end of January. Good. A brief pause. I didn't say anything to him, if you're wondering. This morning at the hotel I passed him in the lobby. He looked at me and I looked at him and we didn't speak. Whatever he decided himself. I know, I said. He does that sometimes. Decides things himself. Just usually takes longer than it should. Most of us are like that, Walter said. About the things that matter. The check arrived on January 28th. A check drawn on the estate account, issued to Clara Moss for $93,142. The exact amount remaining after the estate attorney's fees and 8 months of carrying costs. No note. No letter. Just the check, in a business envelope, with Dean's return address in the upper left corner. I deposited it at my bank on a Tuesday morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward and looked at my banking app and watched the number change. Then I drove to Ava's orthodontist and paid the deposit in full. Then I made my January car insurance payment and the February one while I was at. Then I drove to the auto shop on Route 73 and said, "Finally, please, tell me what the check engine light means." It meant the catalytic converter. Cost $800 to fix. The mechanic said I had been driving on borrowed time for about a year and a half. I knew exactly how long it had been. I gave my notice at Alderman Build Group on February 3rd. My manager, a woman named Sandra who had hired me 4 years ago and had given me my most recent raise and who I genuinely liked, said she was not surprised and also devastated and made me promise to come to the company holiday party next December. Which I promised because I meant it. I started at the Eleanor Ashford Foundation on February 17th. The office on the 3rd floor of the Ashford Grand was smaller than the suite on the 14th and larger than my cubicle at Alderman, and had 2 windows that faced east and a view of the back courtyard garden, which in February was bare but which Priya told me would be full of camellias by March. She was right. The camellias came in while I was still learning the foundation's initial operating structure. 67 blooms on the 3 bushes outside my window, white and deep pink, and a variety called Professor Charles Sargent that bloomed red, and which Eleanor had apparently chosen herself from a catalog 20 years ago. I learned that about Eleanor in small pieces during those early months. The doors and the camellias and the windows that faced specific directions and the chairs that had to be green. I learned her through the choices she had made in rooms she would never return to, the way you sometimes learn the most important things about people after they're gone, in the evidence they left behind. Ava came to the hotel in April. It was a Saturday and I picked her up from Daniel's and we drove to Charlotte and she brought Mr. Nibbles and her new telescope kit book because she had read that there would be a visible planetary alignment that month and she wanted to be ready. Walter met us in the lobby. He was in his usual chair by the window, same as the first night, except now the window showed April sunlight on the Charlotte Street and the potted plant beside the chair had flowered. Something yellow, small, that I had not been there long enough to identify. He was not alone this time. Beside him, in the companion chair that had been mine on Christmas Eve, was a golden retriever the approximate size and color of a small lion, who was sitting very still with the composure of an animal that has been in a great many hotel lobbies and has developed opinions about them. Ava saw the dog before she saw anything else. "Harrison," she said. The dog's ears went up. His entire back half went into motion simultaneously. The joyful, uncontrolled motion of a golden retriever who has heard something that pleases him. Walter stood up when he saw us. He moved more easily in April than he had in December, something in his shoulders less carried, less held. He shook my hand and then he looked at Ava with that same careful, genuine attention he had brought to everything. "You told me to call my dog," he said. "I did," Ava said. "You were right." She knelt down to Harrison's level and Harrison put his enormous head directly onto her shoulder and she held him and laughed, a real laugh, the kind that started in her stomach and came out before she could stop it. And I stood there watching my daughter and this old man's dog and thought, Ruth would have called this evidence. We had tea in the lobby, the 3 of us, with Harrison sitting between Ava's chair and Walter's with his head moving between them in careful equality. Ava asked Walter about the hotel, about Eleanor, about whether he had ever fixed a door himself. He told her about the 12 doors on a Sunday in October, the blue paint, the sandwiches. She listened the way she listens to things that matter to her, with her whole body leaning forward slightly. At one point she said, "So you made everything from $8,000? $8,000 and your mother's sense of where things were going wrong," he said, which was more credit than I deserved but which I understood was partly offered for her benefit and partly because Walter said what he thought and thought the best of people who had earned it. Ava looked at me. The data-gathering look. Then she looked back at Walter. "My mom is really good at that," she said. "Finding where things are going wrong." "I know," Walter said. In July, the foundation funded its first 3 initiatives. a homeownership readiness program in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Housing Authority, a debt counseling service in partnership with 2 community credit unions in Greenville, South Carolina, a small business financial literacy course running through the public library system in 6 counties, because I had sat in my kitchen in Concord and thought about the women I knew who were good at what they did and broke because they didn't know how to read a cash flow statement. And that seemed like a problem with a solution that cost less than the consequences of ignoring it. At the first board meeting in June, I presented the program strategy to the 7 members. I stood at the front of the conference room on the 3rd floor and I said, the gap between what foundations say they do and what they actually do is almost always visible in the line items. So here are the line items. And I showed them, in plain language without jargon, where each dollar was going and why and what we expected to happen and how we would know if we were wrong and what we would do when we were. Walter sat at the far end of the table and listened with his hands folded in his lap the way he had listened to everything I said since Christmas Eve in a hotel lobby when I had no particular reason to be honest with him, and I had been honest anyway. Afterward he said, Eleanor would have liked you. I said, I think I would have liked her. He said, you did in a way. You liked what she built. That's not so different. I found the house in August. A 3-bedroom on a street called Dogwood Lane, 7 minutes from Ava's school, with a backyard that had a fence. Not a good fence, a fence that needed replacing, the same as 100 houses I had passed 100 times without being able to stop. A red maple in the front yard. A kitchen with a window over the sink that faced east. Ava walked through it with me on a Saturday. She went room by room slowly, methodically, the way she does things that matter. She looked out the window over the kitchen sink for a long time. This one, she said. Yeah. She turned around and looked at me with her brown eyes, the ones that have been collecting everything since she was 3 days old in a foster agency crib, and looked up at the fluorescent light like she was studying it. Mom, can I have the room with the yellow wall? We can paint it whatever you want. She thought about it seriously. Can we keep it yellow? We can keep it yellow. She smiled. Not the careful smile, the real one. The one she saves for things she has waited for. We closed on September 14th. I signed the papers at a table that did not wobble, with a pen I brought myself. The check was drawn on an account with a number that had not existed on Christmas Eve 9 months earlier. I drove to the house afterward alone and walked through it empty, every room, my footsteps on the hardwood floors the only sound, and I stood in the kitchen and looked out the east-facing window over the sink and watched the September light come through it. I thought about the lobby bench, about Mr. Nibbles and the Christmas tree and the fire that Ava had pointed at and said, look, a real fire, like it was proof of something. About the elevator doors closing on Dean and Simone and my mother, and the check engine light on the drive home, and Walter sitting alone by the window while the hotel moved around him and nobody came. About $7.50. About how the smallest thing is never only the smallest thing. Here is what I know now that I did not know on Christmas Eve, sitting in a lobby with 2 tote bags full of presents and no room key, and the cold understanding that my family had walked away from me at dinner. I know that the people who underestimate you are working from incomplete information, and the information they're missing is usually you. I know that kindness is not a strategy. You cannot deploy it toward an outcome the way you deploy a tactic. The moment it becomes calculation, it becomes something else, something hollow that looks like the real thing from the outside but weighs nothing in the hand. What Walter saw in me that night, if he saw anything worth seeing, was not a woman who decided to be kind. It was a woman who, in the middle of losing everything she had come to this hotel expecting to have, looked across a lobby and saw another person and thought, that person needs tea. That's it. That was the whole thing. I know that the things we carry, a shoebox on the top shelf, a wallet photograph, a stuffed rabbit, 11 Christmas cards from a woman named Adeline Corby, are not weight. They are the record of the people who saw us and stayed. The people who called on Sunday at 7:30. The people who said, you'll figure it out, baby girl. The people who sat beside us in lobbies when every other door was closed. I know that Ruth was right about me. Not because a billionaire handed me a foundation and a room on the 14th floor. She was right before all of that. She was right on every Sunday call, every 7:30 morning, in every version of a story that had not yet worked out, when she said, steady baby girl, you'll figure it out. She was always right. And I know this. Dean sent a card in October. A regular store-bought card, nothing remarkable, with a message that took up the whole inside. He wrote about Ruth. He wrote about the things he had gotten wrong and why. He did not excuse any of them, which was the most honest thing he had written to me in years. He wrote near the end that he was glad Ava had stayed in the lobby with me that Christmas Eve. That he was glad some things don't go the way you plan them. I read it twice. I put it in the box where I keep the things that matter. Not with forgiveness yet, not fully, but with the door to it left open, because that is where I am and I am not going to pretend to be somewhere I haven't arrived. My mother came to the house on Dogwood Lane for Thanksgiving. She walked through every room and she stood in the kitchen and looked out the east-facing window the same way I had stood in it the September afternoon I signed the papers, and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Ruth would have loved this kitchen." "I know," I said. "That's partly why I chose it." We made dinner together, the two of us, at a table that seats 6 and had 4 place settings that day, mine, hers, Ava's and Daniel's, who brought Ava and stayed for dinner because that's the kind of arrangement we've managed to build out of the wreckage of what we used to be. Ava sat next to her grandmother and told her about Mr. Nibbles and the telescope and a project she was planning about migratory patterns, because she had found Ruth's documentary about the monarch butterflies and watched it 4 times. My mother cried a little when she heard that. The real kind. We let it be what it was. The last time I spoke to Walter was last Tuesday. We have a monthly call brief about the Foundation's progress, and he asks questions that are always the right questions and I give him answers I can stand behind because I made sure the work was worth standing behind before I reported it. At the end of the call he asked about Ava. I told him she had just been named to the school's academic team, that she was reading her marine biology book for the 3rd time, that she had decided the telescope project could wait until summer when the sky was clearer. He said, "Tell her Harrison says hello." I said I would. Then he said, "Merry Christmas, Clara. It's coming up." I looked at my calendar. He was right. 3 weeks. "Merry Christmas, Walter," I said. After I hung up I sat at my desk on the 3rd floor with the camellia garden visible through the window, brown and bare now in December, and I thought about 1 year ago. The red cardigan. The lobby bench. The fire that Ava had pointed at when we came through the revolving door and said, "Look, Mom, a real fire," like the existence of real fire in the world was the proof she needed that everything was going to be all right. She was 10 years old and she was right. The fireplace on Dogwood Lane was not original to the house. I found this out in October when the home inspector walked me through the property a second time before closing. The previous owners had installed it in 2009. A gas insert in a stone surround that they had built into the living room wall where a bookcase had been. The inspector said it worked fine, had been serviced 2 years prior, and the flue was clear. He said it like it was a minor detail. To me it was not a minor detail. I had it serviced again in November. The technician came on a Thursday morning, ran his tests, replaced a seal, and told me I was good through winter. I tipped him $20, which I could now afford without calculating what it moved in the budget, and he looked mildly surprised, which told me I had done it right. Ava's first Christmas in the house on Dogwood Lane was a Saturday. She arrived on Christmas Eve at 4 in the afternoon, Daniel dropping her at the curb the way he does. The handoff that has become so practiced over 4 years that it operates now like a well-maintained piece of machinery, smooth, reliable, without the old friction. He waved from the car. She came up the front walk with her overnight bag and Mr. Nibbles under her arm and the telescope book she has carried everywhere since April, and she came through the front door and stopped. She stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at the fireplace. I had lit it an hour before she arrived. Real flame, real heat, the particular smell of a gas fire that isn't wood but is close enough to be honest. The stockings I had hung on the mantel, 2 of them, one red, one green, bought at a craft fair in November, moved slightly in the warm air rising from the grate. Ava stood there for a long moment. Mr. Nibbles was pressed to her chest. Her overnight bag was still on her shoulder. Then she said, "Mom." "I know," I said. She crossed the room and sat directly in front of the fireplace on the rug I had put there specifically for this purpose. The rug was wool, slightly too expensive, in a deep red and gold pattern that I had carried out of a home goods store under my arm on a Tuesday in November, feeling more certain about it than I had felt about most decisions in recent memory. She sat cross-legged on the rug and held her hands out toward the heat. "It's real," she said. "Gas, but real enough. Real enough counts." She sat there for a long time. I sat beside her. Neither of us talked much. The fire burned. The stockings moved. Outside, Dogwood Lane was quiet and dark and cold in the way residential streets go quiet and dark on Christmas Eve. Every house lit from the inside, everything contained, the whole neighborhood doing what it came home to do. Ava had made me a card that year. She makes them by hand, has since she was 5. She cuts shapes from construction paper and glues them together in layers and writes inside with a fine-tip black marker that she keeps specifically for cards. This one was a house. A small house with a red door and a chimney, and coming from the chimney, a long curl of what was clearly smoke but which she had colored orange and yellow so it looked also like fire. Inside she had written, "For our first Christmas in a house with a fireplace. Thank you for not giving up on the house part." I kept it on the mantel through January. We did not go back to the Ashford Grand that Christmas. Walter had gone to his son's house in Atlanta for the holiday. This was new. The first time in 3 years he had spent Christmas with Robert's family, and when he mentioned it on our November call he said it without ceremony, but I heard what it meant. Something had shifted there. Something the morning of December 25th, or in the months that followed, or in the revision of a document that now protected 12 rooms with blue doors in Asheville. I did not ask him to explain it. The explanation was visible in the fact of it. He came to Dogwood Lane in February. I did not know he was coming until the Thursday before, when he called and said he had business in Charlotte the following week and would I be available for lunch on Wednesday. I said yes and asked if he wanted to come to the house, and he said he would like that. He arrived at noon in a car driven by a man he introduced as Owen, who had apparently been driving him for 12 years and who waited in the car without being asked to. Walter came up the front walk in his dark coat and his polished shoes, and he stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked at the red maple in the front yard. Bare in February, its branches exact and reaching. Eleanor would have chosen this tree, he said. It was already here, I said. But I think I chose the house partly because of it. He smiled. Same thing. We had lunch at the kitchen table, sandwiches I had made, coffee I had brewed in the machine I bought with the first paycheck from the foundation that felt like mine rather than a corrective measure against debt. He sat at the table and looked out the east-facing window over the sink and said nothing about it, just looked the way he looks at things he already understands. After lunch I showed him the foundation's first quarterly report. Not as a performance, not to reassure him he had the report already. His copy had been sent the same week as the board's. I showed him because there was something in it I wanted to point at in person. On page 7, in the homeownership program data, there was a line about completion rates. 63% of enrolled participants had completed the full 8-week course, compared to a national average for similar programs of 38%. The gap was not because our curriculum was better designed than every other program's, though I believed in it. The gap was because every session included 1 hour of what I had called in the proposal real number time. Participants brought their actual financial documents, their actual numbers, their actual situations, and we worked through them together in a group, not as case studies but as the real thing. It had been Ruth's idea in a way. Not consciously. But she had called every Sunday at 7:30 and talked to me about the real things, not the managed version of things, and I had grown up understanding that the real version of a problem is always smaller than the version you carry alone in your head. And the smallest thing you can do for someone who is carrying a problem alone is sit down with them and say, let's look at the actual numbers. Walter read page 7 for a long time. Then he looked up and said, Eleanor would have called this section the proof. Proof of what? That the work is honest. He set the report on the table. She had a particular feeling about reports that showed only the successful outcomes. She called them brochures. This one has the dropout rate too, I said. 37% on page 9. I know. I read page 9 first. I looked at him. You read it backward? I always read reports backward. The last pages are where people put the things they hope you won't reach. He picked up his coffee. Yours had the dropout rate on page 9 and a full analysis of why on page 10. That tells me the work is real. In March I drove to Asheville on a Saturday. Not with Walter alone. He had offered to come, had said he could have Owen drive us both, and I had said no thank you, I want to go by myself the first time. The motor lodge is on a state highway that has been rerouted twice since 1978. And the rerouting is visible in the way the road sits slightly off from the commercial logic of the surrounding area. The businesses that should be there aren't. And the ones that are there have the particular patience of establishments that have survived by serving the people who already know they exist. The lodge itself is 12 rooms in a single-story L shape, The original structure intact under 46 years of small improvements. The parking lot has been repaved at least twice. The office has a new window. But the doors, Eleanor's doors, the ones Walter painted on a Sunday in October 1978, are the same blue. Repainted many times over, the current coat fresh and even, but the same specific shade. I know this because I had described it to Walter on a call in January and he had said, "Peacock blue," Eleanor called it. She said a door should announce itself. I stood in the parking lot for a few minutes. A woman came out of the office, the property manager, I would learn, a woman named Deborah who had worked there for 11 years. She looked at me with the polite wariness of someone managing a property whose ownership situation had recently been clarified in terms of what would not be changing. I introduced myself. Her wariness shifted into something else. "You're from the foundation," she said. "I run it." She looked at me, then at the doors. "Mr. Ashford called last month. Said the property wasn't going anywhere." "It's not." She nodded once, with the weight of someone receiving news they had been told but not yet fully believed. "Good," she said. "That's good." A pause. "You want to see the rooms?" I said yes. Room 4 was the one Walter had told me about. Not because anything particular had happened in it, but because it was the room Mrs. Adeline Corby had stayed in the night her car broke down outside Asheville in 1978. He didn't know which room it was. He said he thought it was around the middle of the building, and room 4 was the middle. I stood in the doorway of room 4. Small bed, clean linens, a window that looked onto the parking lot, a lamp on the nightstand with a pull chain. The bathroom was updated, the flooring had been replaced at some point, but the bones of the room were the same bones as 1978. I thought about a woman named Adeline Corby driving to her daughter in Georgia. About a car that stopped and a man who drove her to a repair shop in the morning, and a room with a blue door that was there when she needed it. About how the smallest thing is never only the smallest thing. Deborah brought me coffee in a foam cup and we sat on the plastic chairs outside the office, and she told me about the regular guests, the truckers on the rerouted highway who had found the place years ago and came back. The family from Greenville who booked room 7 every Thanksgiving because the grandmother didn't like hotel lobbies. The elderly man who had been coming alone every April for 8 years, and always asked for room 1 and never said why. People who needed a door that announced itself. One of the families from the homeownership program closed on their house in May. I know this because their case manager, a woman on my staff named Tanya who had come from the county housing office and who had the particular gift of being able to explain financial documents to people without making them feel like the documents are judging them, called me on a Tuesday morning and said she thought I should know. The family was a woman named Gail Reeves, 34, a certified nursing assistant at a hospital in Gaston County, and her 2 daughters, 8 and 11. Gail had been renting the same apartment for 6 years, and had tried twice before to qualify for a mortgage, and had been declined both times because of a combination of credit history and debt-to-income ratio that was close enough to qualifying to be cruel. She came to the Foundation's program in March. She brought her actual documents. She sat in the real number hour and she spread her actual numbers on the table, and a volunteer and I worked through them with her, and we found 3 things that were wrong that had nothing to do with her income or her credit character and everything to do with the way the numbers were being counted. A student loan in deferment that was being counted as active debt. A medical bill in collections from 2019 that had never been properly disputed. A credit utilization ratio that was 2% above the threshold for the score she needed, which we resolved by the end of that session by adjusting the payment timing on one account. By April her score had moved 11 points. Enough. Tanya said Gail had asked if she could come to the office in person to say thank you. I said of course. She came on a Thursday afternoon with both daughters. The older one, whose name was Simone, not the same Simone, just the name the world produces in its particular abundance, shook my hand like a small professional and said she wanted to be an engineer when she grew up. I told her that was an excellent plan. She said she already knew about load-bearing walls, which she had read about in a library book. I thought about Ava, about the way 10-year-olds carry the whole weight of their futures in one quiet, certain sentence. Gail sat across from me at the table in my office and said that 6 years ago she would not have believed a room with camellias outside the window was a place where her situation could be fixed in an afternoon. I told her the room didn't fix it. She fixed it. We just sat with her while she did. She cried a little when I said that. The real kind. On December 24th of this year, 1 year, exactly from the night I sat on a lobby bench with 2 tote bags and no room key, I was at home on Dogwood Lane. The fireplace was going. Ava was curled on the wool rug with Mr. Nibbles and the telescope book and a cup of hot chocolate she had made herself because she is 11 now and has decided that 11 is old enough to operate the stovetop for beverages. My mother was in the armchair. She had driven up that morning with a casserole dish and a poinsettia she had bought at the grocery store and the pearl earrings, and she had walked through every room of the house again the way she walked through it at Thanksgiving, touching things lightly, taking inventory of a life she had not been present for while it was being built. She had brought Ruth's recipe box. Not the whole box, a copy. She had gone through it over the summer and written out, in her own handwriting on index cards, the recipes that were Ruth's own. Not the ones from magazines or the backs of soup cans. The ones in Ruth's handwriting, the ones with the margins annotated, the ones that said things like use the good butter, not the other kind and this one takes longer than she says. She set them on the kitchen counter when she arrived and did not make a production of it. Just set them down and said, "I thought you should have these." I stood at the counter and held the stack of index cards and looked at Ruth's handwriting and my mother's handwriting and understood that my mother had sat at her own kitchen table and copied every word carefully, which had taken time, which was the point. "Thank you," I said. "She would have loved this kitchen," my mother said. "I know. I think about that a lot." "The window," my mother said, looking at it. "She would have stood at this window every morning." "I do," I said. My mother looked at me. Something moved across her face that I recognized as the expression people have when they understand they have missed more than they realized and the understanding arrives later than it should. "I know I wasn't last year," she started. "Mom." "No. I want to say it." I waited. "I should have come back down," she said. "That night. I knew you didn't have a room. I told myself you'd figure it out. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than going back down in that elevator." She looked at her hands. "I'm sorry, Clara. I should have come back down." 11 months, 6 days. That is how long it had taken her to say it fully. Without preamble, without management, without the tears that redirect the conversation toward her discomfort. Just the sentence. Just, "I should have come back down." "I know," I said. "Thank you." She nodded. She went and sat in the armchair by the fire. Ava looked up from her book and said, "Hello, Grandma," and handed her the throw blanket from the end of the couch because it was cold and Ava always notices who is cold. I stood in the kitchen and looked out the east-facing window. December dark outside. Dogwood Lane lit up, house by house, the quiet neighborhood doing what it came home to do. The red maple in the front yard was bare and reaching. The fireplace behind me was going. My daughter was on the rug. My mother was in the chair. Walter had texted that morning. He texts now, which is recent. Catherine, his daughter-in-law, had apparently shown him how and he had taken to it with the same quiet practicality he brings to everything. The text said, "Merry Christmas, Clara. Harrison sends his regards." He added a dog emoji, which I suspect Catherine also had a hand in. I wrote back, "Merry Christmas, Walter. Tell Harrison Ava says the same." Then I put the phone in my pocket and made coffee and carried it to the living room and sat on the rug beside my daughter and watched the fire that was real enough to count. 1 year. 1 lobby. 1 pot of tea. Ruth used to say that the right thing and the easy thing are almost never the same thing and the gap between them is where you find out who you are. She was right about that too. She was always right. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.